The Healthcare Security Cast is sponsored by 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit www.3dnetworktechnology.com. And by Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit genetec.com. That's GENETEC.com.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Tuesday, June the 30th. On today's episode, we're joined by Bob Stenhouse. Bob will share his career path from a member of a specialized team within the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and a decade in healthcare security leadership. He also details his journey to overcome a post-traumatic stress injury and shares how we can help others do the same. And now, without further ado, let's get into the show. Today, we're joined on the Healthcare Security Cast by Bob Stenhouse. Bob, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I'm pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Now, I always like to start off by learning a little bit about the guest. So I guess I'll ask a loaded question here. Who is Bob Stenhouse?
It is a loaded question. It's also complicated about who I am. Maybe what I can share is what I believe my why to be in terms of my profession, my career path, my journey. Simon Sinek wrote a great book. He's one of the leadership kind of thought leaders that I follow. And he talks about understanding what your why is, finding your why. And really, my why is I'm really passionate about psychological safety and high performance in all workplaces. I like to see workplaces where people are excited to come to work. They trust that their colleagues and their bosses are going to be supportive of them. They're able to be who they are in authenticity, able to state their opinions, troubleshoot, brainstorm, no fear of ridicule or retaliation, mutual accountability, those types of workplaces. I'm passionate about helping organizations develop those. And frankly, in my previous leadership positions, trying to cultivate that within my own areas of influence and responsibilities. So, these types of workplaces that I described, I find are rare, but they can exist with a little bit of work. And that's kind of what I do. And professionally, I bring the solutions to organizations through my workplace safety investigations, proactive teaching on psychological health and safety in the workplace, emotional intelligence, prevention, proactive steps, and leadership development as well. Who I am is I'm going to be 59 years old this year, but I feel like I'm about 25. I think I'm young in mind. I'm a progressive thinker, and I've been called a thought leader, I guess, in my industry, and so I think that one can only be a thought leader if they're a continual learner, and I'm a lifelong learner as well. I'm also a dad. My son's 30 years old, and at one point in time, he worked in healthcare security.
Excellent. I guess if you want to go a little bit deeper into that, if you could talk about your career path and just what's led to you doing everything that you're doing today.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Yeah. So I was in the RCMP for 20 years. I joined when I was 20 years old, and I went through the ranks quite quickly, and I actually went into some very highly specialized units across the country. I was on one of the highly specialized unit out in Vancouver called the Undercover Unit back in the early 1990s, where we developed basically a method of investigating cold case homicides called Mr. Big Investigations, and I was one of the pioneers in that team. And then I was also on a specialized unit out in Ottawa, the anti-terrorist team called CERT at the time. I was jumping out of helicopters and down sides of buildings and blowing things up, all the stuff you see in the movie. So I was part of that team for a while. And then in Edmonton, I was part of a specialized team looking at biker gang investigations. And in the midst of all of that, my career pretty well crashed and burned back in about 1998, 1999. I was going through significant burnout, anger, frustration at bureaucracy, frustration at leadership or lack thereof, and frustration at certain strategies that I felt were unethical that I was being asked to be a part of. So I ended up having a bit of a split with the RCMP. I was a whistleblower when whistleblowers was a bad word, and now it's no longer a bad word. But back in those days, it was pretty rare. And I ended up having both a court of public opinion and legal court battle with the RCMP, which I was successful at as well. Throughout that, I started to go on a path where I chose to be better over bitter, and began on a journey of self-discovery, working towards increased mental health, spiritual health, and wellness. I studied, I read, I took courses, listened to wisdom leaders along the way. And, just started to get well coming out of that sort of real dark time. After consulting for a couple of years in the early 2000s, I joined Alberta Health Services as first a manager, then a director and executive director in charge of protective services, primarily the specialized support units for Alberta Health Services. For your listeners, Alberta Health Services is the largest health authority in Canada with 110,000 employees, contract physicians. I was in charge of the specialized unit, so corporate investigations unit that I developed, training and development unit, enterprise security systems, fire and life safety, and professional standards, and a provincial dispatch center. So that was my role for approximately 10 years within Alberta Health Services. And then the last 2 years, I've launched and developed a consulting firm where I specialize in workplace investigations and training, psychological health and safety training, and leadership development and emotional intelligence.
Excellent. And given your experience, just both with law enforcement and with healthcare, I'm sure there's some people who've stuck out as mentors for you. Who are some of your mentors, and what have you learned from them that's helped you navigate your career?
I must say I haven't had many formal mentors. I'm sadly, sometimes leadership in many environments can be found to be wanting. From a healthcare security perspective, I've always enjoyed the friendship and the mentorship of Don McAllister, who I know a lot of your listeners will recognize, Don for his contribution in healthcare security. Always had enjoyable time with Don, just talking about some of the challenges that healthcare security frontline officers face, as well as managers and leaders. Most of my leaders and mentors have that I've learned from have been authors and speakers who I've really enjoyed their writing. People like Patrick Lencioni, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, Daniel Goleman, Amy Edmondson, all kind of thought leaders in the area of leadership, and particularly in this area of psychological health and safety and workplace wellness.
Right now, you consider hospital security personnel first responders, and I believe many of us would agree with you. Can you elaborate a little bit your position regarding this topic?
Absolutely. When I first joined healthcare security, Brian, I was a manager, so I never worked frontline healthcare security. I always say that I worked healthcare security before there was healthcare security, because back in the early 80s, in some of the small hospitals or even larger hospitals that I worked that were in the communities I was policing, there was no security officers there, so the police were the ones providing that level of security. And then, of course, the profession has obviously evolved to a place where some of the larger hospitals have a significant team of healthcare security officers on any shift. But, I really saw some parallels. As I started to manage a team and as I worked into corporate investigations where we were actually investigating allegations of wrongdoing, excessive use of force. And obviously those in the front lines, this is no surprise to know that healthcare security is quite violent. I would say that we had a peace officer program out here in Alberta. And I would say that if you were to ask any peace officers within the province, so peace officers are designated by the province with certain enforcement authorities. They're kind of less authority than police, obviously, but more authority than security guards. And so we had our internal peace officers plus contract security guards. And any peace officer across the province, would maybe get into a violent situation maybe once every 3-4 months. Well, I was seeing our peace officers getting into violent situations and maybe restraint of a mental health patient or, having to keep people safe in the emergency department from disruption and violence, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. And so that was significant. And then, of course, the number of suicides that occur in the hospitals, there's a bit of and I know that you're aware of this and your listeners are aware of it, that, some people choose to take their lives in hospitals thinking that, well, I'm going to end up here anyway, so it's going to be less traumatic for my loved ones or whatever. It's hard to really understand what people are thinking, when they have considered, taking their own life. But presumably there must be some sort of aspect of that when suicides occur, whether it be we've had suicides from people, jumping off parkades to hanging themselves to going into a bathroom and shooting themselves in the bathroom at the emergency department. We've had homicide or attempted homicide and very high pressure. And who gets the first call in terms of making sure that people are safe? That's the frontline security officer. Well, these are the types of things that the police respond to in the community that healthcare security officers are responding to, and some large hospitals are responding to daily within the hospital. So it's high pressure. They can be very traumatic events. And I really do believe that they should be considered along with other first responders in terms of some of the support systems that are out there and some of the reduction of stigma with respect to first responder trauma.
All right. And for the purposes of our conversation today, we'll be focusing a lot on psychological safety and trauma in healthcare security. Now, I'm sure your background that you alluded to earlier has contributed significantly to your passion for this topic. Would you mind going into a little bit more detail about your story?
Sure, absolutely. So I was one of those, because of the specialized units I was involved in and my early promotions, I went from constable to staff sergeant quite quickly in the RCMP. And so I was always one of those, kind of guys that I saw myself as 10 foot tall and bulletproof. And because of some of the work I had been doing across the country. And of course, ego plays a role into there as well. And we were high flyers in a lot of the work that we were doing. And little did I know that I was not doing well from a mental health perspective. And it wasn't until years later that I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress injury. And I had to come to terms with that, and I had to accept it, and I had to start, as I said earlier, choose better instead of bitter. And, so I went through my crash and burn with the RCMP and went to a therapist to try to figure it out. And I've been to several therapists over the years, which again, there should be no stigma attached to that at all. But in terms of why it's made me passionate, I'll give you an example. One of the managers that ended up, or he's a manager, then a coordinator, then a manager, ended up working within my team. I saw him originally as a young, smart, switched on, really highly motivated officer. And over the years, I saw his mental health start to deteriorate. And I was worried about it. And I also saw the way he was being treated by some of his previous managers and some of his previous colleagues, and it wasn't good. He was being kind of ostracized and isolated and spoken about and gossiped about, and it really bothered me because I saw in this young man a lot of promise. And we started to develop I was in a senior leadership position, but I always had an open door policy. We started to develop a bit of a relationship, and he shared with me his own post-traumatic stress that came as a result of discovering getting the call that someone had tried to hang themselves in the stairwell. And someone did hang themselves, and he was trying to rescue the man and trying to relieve the stress and pressure on the ligature, and the man died. And he shared that severely traumatized him, as I'm sure it would anyone. So, I started to kind of realize that this affects everybody. Some people are very, can come out fairly unscathed, and other people, trauma affects us is so differently. And because I was one of those people that was, seen as the 10 foot tall and bulletproof and, tough as nails and all those types of things, doing all these, kind of exciting types of roles, I realized that I could use my story to help others. If I could, destigmatize the idea of trauma in first responders by utilization of my own personal story, then it'll help reduce the stigma and just increase awareness and increase mental health.
Great. And for most of us, we can probably agree on what trauma is, but just for the context of the rest of our discussion, would you explain what you mean by psychological safety in trauma?
Yeah, so psychological safety as a concept, it's something that I've been looking for, and I've been advocating for many, many years. As a concept, the idea of psychological safety in the workplace is twofold. One, from a leadership perspective or from a high performing perspective, is that it's a safe place. Your workplace culture, whether it be your team at the team level or your hospital or your department or your division, that it's safe for people to come to work and be who they are, state an opinion, debate, wrestle with ideas, wrestle with decisions, and know that there's not going to be retaliation for them showing up to be who they actually are. And so that becomes a psychologically safe workplace. Psychological safety from the other aspects. So I'm certified in psychological health and safety through the Canadian Mental Health Association, as well as I recently completed my advanced certificate in psychological health and safety in the workplace by from the University of Fredericton. And the idea there is that you can't have psychological health unless you have psychological safety, and psychological safety being also the absence of harm. That you're, and I'm talking now about bullying, harassment, ridicule, contempt, gossip, those types of things, which can be prevalent, and it can be prevalent in first responders, and I've seen it being prevalent in healthcare security departments as well, depending on the leader. And so there's that linkage between how can you possibly be mentally safe and talk about trauma, talk about our mental health if it's not safe, because people may ridicule, roll their eyes, gossip, or it could negatively affect one's career. And so psychological safety is a key component of helping people get well through some of the traumas that they may have experienced.
Right. And you've been very open about your own journey in navigating a post-traumatic injury.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks for that, because these are very difficult issues for most people to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
and you're making it safe for these conversations to happen. So
yeah, well, thanks, Brian. That's certainly the mission for sure.
Awesome. Now, just the fact that you've been open about it, what's the impact that that's had on you?
Well, I mean, let's face it. I mean, there's always going to be naysayers, and there's always going to be people that will sit in judgment and ridicule, right? And that's just life. And I've come to the point of my life in my career. I've been in the workforce for over 40 years, and I've come to the point in my life to realize that other people's opinions don't matter. I need to be true to who I am and true to what I think can help others in terms of more of a greater good for our cultures and our societies, our workplace cultures and societies. And so I know that from my perspective, I have no shame in speaking about my post-traumatic stress. I had some very high highs in my career in terms of my accomplishments, and I've had some severe lows. And so I'm not concerned about people sitting in judgment or ridicule. And frankly, the people that hear me speak, or when I do my public speaking and those types of things, I get many people coming up to me afterwards and thanking me for that. It's the exact same what you just talked about, is that, the more we can destigmatize these types of things, the more that we can encourage a better, more supportive work environment, the less we're going to have people harmed and less we're going to have people off work. And so it's a win-win. And it really does boil down to leadership. I'd like to talk more about that a little later.
All right, yeah, actually, and I think we'll go right into that. So, what are some of the barriers that you see that impact individuals? That basically prevent them from taking the steps they need to get help. And as leaders, how can we kind of foster that or have those conversations?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I believe it is all about leadership. And when I say leaders, it's of any rank or position. As you know, Brian, on a shift in a hospital, even though there might not be a formal supervisor, there's going to be someone there that's a natural leader. And some supervisors aren't leaders. They're supervisors, but they're not necessarily leaders. So I use the terminology leadership of any rank, any position. But anyone that is in a position of supervisory management or above, I've seen this across the country. They need to become more compassionate, more empathetic with the folks that they're supervising. If they're not, and if they're the type of people that roll their eyes and ridicule and show contempt and for someone that's maybe struggling a little bit, they're sending the indicators to all of their team that it's not a safe place. And so leaders need to become more compassionate and empathetic. They could be in healthcare security for 15 years, but if they're not compassionate and empathetic, it really is their experience really means nothing. I believe that when someone goes into a supervisory position, they have to take that next step. They can't be one of the frontline, good old boys or gals and that type of thing. They need to start caring. They need to become informed on the issues, right? They need to inform themselves on mental health and trauma and those types of things. They need to see, the world through other lenses other than their own. And need to start, understanding issues like mental health and approach it with some wisdom and some kindness. So it definitely is about leadership and leadership at all ranks. That's going to help officers navigate some of the challenges, but it's also going to increase performance in terms of the culture of a team or of a hospital.
Now, for someone who's a leader and, maybe they recognize some of these issues or see signs of some of these issues within their teams, what are some first steps? Do you know of any resources that they could maybe look at that would help them facilitate these conversations as well, or just help them kind of know what a good starting point would be?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how I started so in 2016, I became familiar with what's called the Road to Mental Readiness Program. That's been developed by the Department of National Defense in partnership with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And I read an article actually about our EMS at Alberta Health Services. We're ushering into the Road to Mental Readiness Program into their training, their recruit training, their ongoing training, their leadership training. And I started to look into the possibility of bringing it into our protective services. So again, to put some context, I think we have in Alberta Health Service, again, I haven't been there a couple of years, but Alberta Health Services, I believe there's over 300 officers, combination of in-house peace officers and contracts. So quite a large department across the province. And so I started to, I sought permission to bring the training program into protective services. I became a trainer myself, and it was we initiated it. We trained, I think, 8 trainers across the province. We started with we started training our leaders, so managers, supervisors, directors, and then we initiated into our recruit training. We have a 3-week recruit training program that officers were going through, so we brought it into there. And at the same time, I was also bringing in emotional intelligence and psychological safety training for our recruit classes. That I personally delivered because I felt passionate about it, and I felt it important for new officers within our ranks to see a senior leader that was taking these types of issues very seriously, because they're all linked, right? So road to mental readiness, emotional intelligence, psychological safety, mental wellness, they're all very, very closely linked. And so it really becomes a matter of whether or not a leader wants to become a champion of these types of issues and see the value in bringing them into their training or into their workplace cultures. There's a lot of resources out there. Road to Mental Readiness, of course, is one of them, and it's a great program. But there's a lot of other resources that they can, informally, choose to start to really educate themselves on the issues facing first responders. And again, I think the paradigm and the understanding that I truly believe that healthcare security officers are first responders, and there's not much that they haven't experienced that a police officer wouldn't be experiencing on the street.
No, I think you raise a really good point there. Our frontline security staff are getting number one, they're getting some great experience, and unfortunately, given the environment, it does at times lead to situations where people do suffer from trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But really, my approach has always been, if you can do security in a hospital, you can do it almost anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. We saw that in Alberta Health Services, where we were the farm team for police recruitment, that the police recruiting officers would say that if they were looking to recruit someone into policing that had a high level of skill set right from the get-go, they'd be looking at healthcare security. Compared to other areas of the private security industry, that healthcare security, it's a high stress and it's a highly professional, and there's high expectations. You're dealing with doctors, you're dealing with nurses, you're dealing with clinical professionals that have high expectations, and so an officer has to be able to adapt and and answer the call within those expectations, and so you're getting a higher caliber of officer. I truly believe that.
Excellent. And so yourself, you do some work with first responders in working them through these traumatic events. Can you talk to us a little bit about that work as well?
Well, I've actually developed a workshop that it was supposed to be delivering to first responders in Calgary, except for COVID-19, and it's psychological health and safety and the first responder. And so the idea because of my psychological health and safety training, I've developed a specific training program workshop for first responders. And it's really about what we've been talking about, is the idea that first responders have, first off, the culture of first responders, as you are aware, can become negative. If leaders allow it, if that kind of negativity seeps in, it can become quite cynical, quite negative, ridiculing of the clients we're working with or the client base that we're working with. And so that I call that stuff out and I say, look, these are going to be your challenges. I've seen it myself. I've been there myself, where the next thing you know, the people that you're interacting with are, we call them derogatory names, and we see them as less than human. And so I address those types of issues from a first responder perspective, and I talk about the idea of psychological safety. That if you have someone that is struggling, the last thing they need is that cynicism and that negativity, because they're not going to come forward. If they know that people are going to be talking about them or ridiculing them, or if the systems aren't in place to support, or leadership doesn't believe in this stuff. Back in my day, we didn't need these types of things. You're just going to grow a thick skin. Come on, what's wrong with you, right? That type of attitude, then of course, then people are just going to keep their pain hidden. And so it's, like I said, I will gently but firmly call that type of stuff out and say that this is not helpful. And because I've been there, hopefully I can speak from that experience and that credibility.
Absolutely. No. That being said, we've covered a number of topics here. Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you'd like to discuss?
I really, again, it goes back to leadership. And I encourage anybody that's been promoted into a leadership position that they need to continue to grow, that they need to put aside their cynicism, their negativity, if they're wired that way, and they need to grow into compassion, wisdom, empathy. Who doesn't want that type of leader? And, firm, fair, friendly. That's the type of leaders we all want. If we look around, we've had some maybe in our careers, but we've also seen the opposite, right? Where we've seen that angry, aggressive, cynical type of leadership that's just not helpful. And again, that, who knows? That could be a symptom of their own trauma, right? But that's not helpful. So I really think that this topic really comes down to leadership, because the leader sets the tone. And the leader sets the tone at their team level, at their hospital level, at their district level. The leader sets the tone for the type of culture that is going to be, kind of the culture that's happening within their teams.
Absolutely. Before we close, what can we expect from you in the future? I know right now a lot of things are kind of put on hold with the physical distancing and just dealing with this whole pandemic. But what have you been working on? I know you mentioned the workshops. You were regularly a conference speaker as well when we were still having conferences, and you've been on some other podcasts. But what can we expect from you moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. So I'm writing my book. It's been written in my head a million times, and little did I realize that it's much different writing it in your head versus sitting down with the discipline of actually writing. And so I'm writing my book with an anticipated release date of September. And going back into some of my experiences undercover in the RCMP, where I was a hired hitman. The title of my book is A Hitman's Guide to Psychologically Safe Workplaces. And that's one of the talks I gave as a keynote, and it went over very well. And I've implemented that into my workshops as well. So I've got a book. I'm going to be, I have some of these conferences that I was supposed to speak at in the spring are likely rescheduled to the fall. So I look forward to more conference presentations and keynotes in the fall. And in the meantime, of course, I'm running my own business. I've got workplace investigations that I have going on all the time, as well as health and safety investigations, and then I also train in workplace investigations. So I'm busy, but it's good. It's been a great place to be, and I'm passionate about bringing the message of psychological safety in the workplace in terms of increasing psychological wellness amongst all of my clients. And I've got I spent 10 years in healthcare security, so I've got a real soft spot for people that are in that industry.
Excellent. And in closing, what message would you like to share with the Healthcare Security Cast community? Well,
it's so interesting, Brian. I'm really excited about what you're doing in terms of bringing that level of professionalism, that level of industry professionalism to the healthcare security industry. And my first and foremost, and I used to say this to the officers all the time: be proud of your profession. Keeping people safe is a noble calling, and it's one to be proud of. And so, first and foremost, be proud of your profession. Hospital security has its own set of challenges, and it's got high expectations and demands. And then, I'd say grow in wisdom and understanding. If there's any time for people to be lifelong learners, now is the time. We have information at our fingertips to be able to grow and learn in leadership. And so I really encourage anyone that's going to be making a career out of healthcare security is to continue to grow, to continue to push yourself, continue to take courses, increase understanding, increase emotional intelligence, again, growing in emotional intelligence. When I was teaching emotional intelligence and healthcare security, I'd say here's the reason. Healthcare security is highly emotional. And so if it's highly emotional, then why wouldn't we increase our emotional intelligence, grow in empathy for others? And then lastly, I used to say this for the frontline officers in our course. I said, with all your might, resist negativity and cynicism. They'll not only destroy your mind and soul, but they'll damage your career. So resist that cynicism that can creep in from the industry. Seek out positive and progressive leaders that care. And I always say, if you don't have a positive and progressive leader, become one. And so, read, grow, develop, be proud. It's a good profession. And I've met some wonderful, wonderful people around North America that have made it their careers, their career path. And I think it's a really noble career.
Excellent. Now, for anybody who's wondering, I know I connected with you on LinkedIn, but what's the best way to connect with you, Bob?
Yeah, as you know, Brian, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is best, Bob Stenhouse on LinkedIn. If someone is not on LinkedIn, my website, it's Veritas Solutions. So Veritas, Veritas solutions.net. Veritas actually means truth in Latin, and truth is important to me. So so you can contact me on through my website or on LinkedIn.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time, Bob. I just want to say I'm really glad that you were able to overcome the challenges that come with a post-traumatic stress related injury, and I'm sure it's still there's still times where it's difficult, but I'm glad that you were able to overcome that and you're able to help so many people because it is really important work.
Great. Thanks, Brian. And all the best to you and what you're doing as well. And congrats on your recent award as well. You're a progressive leader that I'm looking forward to seeing where your career takes you as well.
Oh, thanks, Bob. I appreciate that a lot. And this concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. Join us on the next episode when our guest is Don McAllister. In the meantime, engage with the Healthcare Security Cast on social media by joining the Healthcare Security Cast community groups on LinkedIn and Facebook, and following our business pages on the same platforms. You can also follow us on Twitter at HC SecurityCast, on Instagram at the Healthcare Security Cast, and TikTok at healthcare_security_cast. Also, feel free to connect with me on any of these platforms as well. I'll be the only Brian, Brine, Hamilton on any of these platforms. Until next time, stay safe and take care.